Hi guys. Welcome to outer space. We'll see. I don't know. I like changing backgrounds, mixing it up a bit. So today in class, we actually looked at the quiz for next week, and you guys researched your own rationales. We'll see if it worked. Upcoming. Hopefully, I want you to understand these concepts. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start the lecture. We're going to talk about chapter five. I'm sorry, eight, nine, and 10. So I'm going to share my screen and we're going to start with chapter 8, which is the assessment chapter. Okay. And we're going to go from the beginning. Okay. So chapter 8, I'm going to move myself up higher because I hate looking at myself. So chapter 8, assessment. Assessment for mental health and illness is different than physical assessment. Of course, we all know we need to rule out the physical first before we can actually get into the diagnosis, the diagnostics for assessment of mental illness, because mental illness is a rule out. So let's talk about that a little bit. So the purpose is to get a current state of their emotions and their mental capabilities and help them develop a plan of care to be effective, basically in the community and be able to work in society and be effective in society. So we need our patients to participate. That's very important. If they're not on board, then you're not going to get anything done because we can't make them do anything. They have to want to help themselves, and you got to have a positive attitude about it. It can be very frustrating dealing with people who would sooner not live in our reality, um, or whose priorities are different. Maybe they want to buy crack instead of buying their medications, who knows? But we just have to have that unconditional positive regard and solidify that therapeutic relationship. So to the best of their ability to understand. Okay. So first things first, let's talk about the interview. Interview with someone is the private assessment, the beginning assessment. It should be someplace safe, very quiet, at least 4 feet away from everybody else, preferably in a private room. We only get perceptions of the patient from other people, so we try not to use other people for the assessment unless our patient is completely not capable of giving us any data. Then we can kind of realize that we can take an assessment from a family member, but it's going to be biased. So, and then when our patients get better, we can revisit it and get some solid answers. We do want to use open-ended questions to get conversations going. Broad openings are good, which focused only if the patient cannot extrapolate. So if they can't answer an open-ended question, they're sitting there, they're quiet, they're catatonic, then you can say, you're depressed today, or you seem depressed today. So something a little more focused in on exactly what they're experiencing to get their perception of it. When interviewing a client, the nurse should select an area that is quiet and isolated from others. No, we don't necessarily want to be isolative. If even if you're doing it in their room, you can leave the door open. Um, they don't know you, so you want to be someplace that they can realize that they're safe. So safety is very important. First thing we're going to do, age, history, developmental stage. That's very important. You want to know, according to Erickson, where they're at, because a lot of times where they're at may not be where they're supposed to be developmentally. Think about the 70-year-old who is still seeking intimacy versus isolation, which is young adult. And he should be looking at his life and was it successful or not. So we want to compare the two. We want to look at culture. Of course, we've already talked about we don't want to just superimpose our culture as being the most important culture, which egocentrism is something that is a real problem in sociology with a lot of dominant cultures. So we just want to look at that and ask them, how can I best help you? We want to look at it from their spiritual beliefs. I myself am agnostic. However, I was raised in the Catholic Church. So when you're talking to me, I tend to be more scientifically focused rather than religiously focused. But there are some people who are very religiously or very spiritual, maybe don't believe in a God, but believe in a higher power. Whatever it is, you just need to be cognizant of that and aware of it. And you also want to know their previous history. If they've been admitted 3 times for schizophrenia, the chance they have a brain tumor that is causing their delusions is probably not as high as when they're initially diagnosed. How they look. How do they look? Are they groomed appropriately? Have they had a shower? Do they smell? How are they dressed? How are they sitting up? Do they make eye contact, or are they just kind of crumpled over and staring down? Because, personally, we know that this is probably some sort of a private mood, either depressed or just not wanting to be interactive. Do they have any unusual mannerisms like automatisms? Automatisms are the people who like they clap their fingers on the table, or they do this, or they wring their hands. And it's something that they just do to help them deal with stress. So some people's automatisms can be very irritating to other people. Sometimes automatisms, they're always a reaction to stress, but sometimes they happen because of certain medications that you take. So you got to kind of think about what are their medications that they're on also. We want to look at the psychomotor retardation, which you see a lot in depression. They're very slow to act or react to things, and it just takes so much time for the thought to be created in the brain, to go to the mouth, to come out to the world the way they want it to come out. And we'll talk more about that when we talk about depression. Usually I ask you to count to 20 in your head when you're talking with a depressed patient to give them adequate time to comprehend what you've asked them and formulate an answer and get it back out to you. So we kind of talked about waxy flexibility in class. It's a form of almost physical retardation because you can put them in different positions like a wax mannequin and they don't move. It frequently is associated with catatonia, which is associated with schizophrenia. Like I said, we'll talk about each individual thing as it appears in the disease process. Neologisms, this is a fun one. Seen a lot in mania, or you could see it in schizophrenia, some of the psychotic disorders. It's new words. They make up words. Like my friend, she named her son Isachariah Rook because she liked the word names Isachariah, Isaac, Zachariah, and Rook. And so she just put them all together. So she named him Zachariah Rook. That's one name. And that would be considered a neologism. We want to look at their mood. We want to see if it's consistent, their nonverbals and their verbals. We want to give it a name. So what their affect looked like, what their face looks like. We have blunted and we have flat. Flat is there's nothing there. Nothing. Blunted is just very slow reaction. We have broad affect, and it's really not a normal. Broad affect is what you see mainly in mania. So they're all over the place. It's hitting every emotion that's out there. Very akin to labile. Labile, however, is more it's more mood driven. So you see them really hostile or really friendly and very closely intertwined in a matter of moments. And then, of course, we have the inappropriate affect, which, you see maybe you see a serial killer smile. I really like chopping his head off. That's really inappropriate to be saying and to be smiling at the same time. And then restricted affect. We see restricted affect in abuse victims. A lot of times they are holding something back, they're restricting sharing it with you. And so we see that hesitancy to share with us exactly what's going on, and we see it on their face. Um, we want to think about their thought processes and their content of thoughts. So the process is how they think, and the content is what they say. Okay, so we have a bunch of different ways to describe it for our charting. We have circumstantial, which is really interesting. I call it my teenager speak because they actually will tell you 50 million things under the sun. Um, and eventually get to an answer. Like my teenage daughter, I say, "How was the dance?" And she goes on and she talks about her friend Jenny, and she talks about her friend Jenny's boyfriend, and she talks about the chaperones at the dance, and then she talks about so and so in his car, and then she talks about, somebody put liquor in the punch or whatever, but it was fine. So she gets to the answer, but she's got to tell me everything in between. The delusional thought process are fixed and false beliefs, which means um, I believe I'm Jesus Christ. That's a delusion. It's not a hallucination, it's a delusion. And then we have flight of ideas and loose associations. Those two people get confused up. Loose associations make no sense at all. They could be talking about, the Eastern government said that they were going to kill Trump, but you know what? Those puffs are really good to eat. Nothing really in common. There's no flow, no cognizant awareness of it. Whereas flight of ideas is a bunch of ideas. They all make sense. They just come all at one time. They're really fast. I see it a lot in mania. Ideas of reference, that is where either the newspaper is talking to them, or some sort of social media is talking to them, or the TV is talking to them directly. That is an idea of reference. Tangential thinking, they go way off on a tangent and they never get to the answer that you ask them, like, how was the dance? She never gets back there. She keeps talking about everybody else that were at the dance, but doesn't get back to that question that I asked. Um, then we have thought broadcasting, where there are people that think that other people can hear what they're thinking. They're broadcasting it out. Third, thought insertion. Oh my God, somebody stuck in my brain that I need to eat ho-hos every day. It's in there because somebody else put it in there. We have thought blocking, where they're talking a mile a minute, and then all of a sudden they just stop. So, and then we have thought withdrawal. You probably feel like this after a test where you're doing a test and you feel like everything has been sucked out of your brain and you don't know the answers. None of that is accurate. None of it's true. None of it happens. But these are all thought processes and content. And then we have word salad, which could be individual words like cotton, green, sky. I even probably made that too coordinated there, but anyway, just three individual words, four individual words. They can have whole conversations with just individual words that have no connection at all. So you'll know word salad when you see it. Suicide assessment. We have to assess for suicidality, and this is a direct question. It's not a broad question, it's more direct. Do you believe you're going to kill yourself? Or do you believe you're going to kill somebody else? So you think you're going to kill yourself? You think you're going to kill somebody else? Um, we do have a duty to warn the person if it is a hostile, uh, I'm sorry, well, I had lunch a little indigestion. We want to assess homicidal thoughts. So if they are homicidal, then we want to be sure to know that there is no HIPAA protecting that expression. So we have a right to contact authorities or to harm or to tell the other person of the potential harm. That's called a duty to warn, and we do have a duty to warn. We want to assess their sensorium and their intellectual processes, so orientation. And remember, there are four steps to orientation. Who are you? Where are you? What time is it? And what are you here for? So person, place, time, and situation. We want to assess memory. So you want to ask them things that are verifiable. In other words, you don't want to say, "What'd you have for breakfast?" Because unless you were there to watch them eat, you don't know if they're telling you the truth. Okay. If you sat with them while they ate their breakfast and they said, "Well, we shared, an egg McMuffin." And if that's true, then okay, that's a good assessment. But oh yeah, we shared an egg McMuffin and hash browns, and this person had Pop-Tarts. So that's a lie, or at least an inaccurate memory. We want to assess their ability to concentrate. And this is where they have to solidly think about things. I like serial sevens. That's where you count by sevens. Um, uh, Doing the days of the week backwards. That's a good one for their ability to concentrate. Um, let's see. There's another one that's coming to me, but it's real slow, so we'll move on. And then abstract thinking and intellectual abilities. So what would you do, if you had a flat tire in downtown Lima? What would you do if you were stranded on a desert island? What would you do if you found out your partner was having an affair? So you give them like a abstract and I'm sorry, I did that wrong. That's what it was. It was confusing me. That is judgment. So hypothetical situation is judgment, not abstract thinking. Hypothetical situation is judgment. So judgment, what would you do? And that is another assessment that's on the next slide, I think. Abstract thinking is where you give them a hypothetical and you ask them to explain it to you. So something along the lines of a stitch in time saves nine. What does that mean? That's an abstract thought. A rolling stone gathers no moss. What does that mean? Um, and if they really have trouble with abstract thought, they'll say, "A rolling stone gathers no moss." It just means a rolling stone won't get any moss on it. But someone who has accurate abstract thinking will say, "Oh, that means that if I move around, I'm not going to stagnate." So that's abstract thinking. Sorry, didn't mean to confuse you. We already talked about judgment. Obviously, what would you do in a situation? Um, that lets us see how they would judge themselves based upon a situation. And then we want to assess for sensory or perceptual alterations, auditory or visual hallucinations. Hallucinations are not beliefs. They're not things you believe. They are actually attached to your senses. So you can have visual, which is sight. You can have auditory, which is hearing. You can have gustatory, which is taste. You can have tactile, which is touch. And you can have olfactory, which is smell. But you want to assess alterations in perception. We want to assess self-concept. So how do they feel about themselves, their worth and their dignity? Description of physical characteristics and body image, or things that they experience. So if someone tells you, if you ask, how do you feel about yourself? And they say, "Well, I probably eat too much." That is a description of physical characteristic of their body image. Or if they say, "I'm pretty worthwhile, I'm a pretty important person," then that's another self-concept question you may ask. And then we want to ask about their roles and their relationships. Now, something you need to remember about roles. Roles are things that you choose for yourself. Okay. Um, Being black is not a role. You did not choose that. Being white is not a role. You did not choose that. Okay, that's genetics. Choosing for yourself to be a mom, to be a dad, to be a student, those are roles. So you would be a student, like I'm a teacher and I'm a mom and I'm a real estate agent. Those are all roles that I choose for myself. So those are my current roles. And then your ability to fulfill those roles. So are you a good mom? Are you a good dad? And how do you explain that you're a good mom or a good dad? And did that change recently with a divorce? Are you very happy in that relationship? Do you appreciate that relationship? I am a nurse practitioner. I like being a nurse practitioner, but I enjoy being an educator much more, which is why that's what I do full time. So that's all individual. We'll want to ask about social media. That's really important, especially with all the bullying and things that go on with social media. And then we want to categorize the family assessment. You can look in chapter 8 at box 8.3, but basically you want to see where they feel they are within their family. Next, we want to look at their self-care considerations. How do they eat? How do they sleep? Do they have any chronic problems? Do they smoke, use drugs? Do they take their pills? My uncle just had a stroke. He didn't take his pills. Let his blood pressure get out of control, had a stroke. Nobody ever asked him, do you take your pills? I asked him. He's like, I don't want to take that poison. I'm going to take my natural herbs. So when he had his stroke, I said, are you going to take your pills? And he said, yes, I am. So which item would the nurse include when assessing a client's self-concept? Their roles, their support systems, their body image, or their abstract thinking. So we're assessing self-concept. Which one of those has self-concept? How they feel about themselves in it? I would say body image. Ha, there we go. And there's your rationale. You can read that if you want to. Our analysis as RNs or future RNs, our analysis is kind of what sets us aside and assists us in our plan of care. So an overall assessment has to be driven by looking at themes or patterns. So it helps you understand how a person feels about themselves. Let's say you have someone with an eating disorder and they talk about their relationship with food and they talk about being prideful and not eating as much as everybody else. And then they talk about their body image and they talk about how they feel themselves being overweight. And you look at them and you see that they're quite severely underweight. That should say to you, while they have this consistent theme, or this consistent pattern of their relationship with food not being accurate, that they're probably anorexic. So that's our way of analyzing. But it does change. You do have to look for new patterns every time you do an assessment. Is there anything that's changed? Is there anything that's different? Usually that's how we know people are getting better, when they change the way that they relate to things, such as our anorexic who says, I'm really underweight. I need to gain some weight. That's a definite change. What happened there? How did her perception alter? There are some psychological testing that we can do for analysis. You guys have probably heard of the PHQ-9. I have a copy of it if you want to see it. It's an assessment that they do in primary care for patients who could be experiencing depression. We do psychiatric, well, we don't do diagnoses, but the doctor will do diagnoses. Which can be supported by that magic book, the DSM-5, that you can access to see exactly what they would appear. And then the mental status exam, you probably have done this one yourself in the different areas that you're at, the mini mental status examination. I guess we already talked about this. Intelligence tests, the cognitive abilities and intellectual functioning, they do have those out there. Personality tests, I don't know if I really look at that, but they have a couple of those that are out there too. Self-concept, impulse control, reality testing, and you can look at the different ones under personality tests in table 8.1 and 8.2. Overall, though, for personality, you really want to look at Erikson and you want to do comparative analysis of where they're supposed to be and where they currently are. There's the DSM-5. We talked about it already. There's your diagnosis that your doctor will make, and it'll let you see what they're supposed to look like. The mini mental. Mini mental, if you've not done it, it does orientation, person, place, time, situation. You can look at it, time of season, date, day of the week. Cognitive abilities, the abstract thought for the proverbs. Rolling Stone gathers no moss. We can have them do math. I have them do like a little bit very simplistic math problem. If you're going 70 miles an hour and your destination is 1 hour, is 70 miles away, how long will it take you to get there? 1 hour. So you can give them 3 words and then wait a little bit and have them repeat those words back to you. Identification of common objects. Sometimes people get really confused about what is this? Is this a pencil or a pen? It looks the same, but that's going to tell you how specific their mentation is. I use this one a lot, the following the multi-step command. Walk to the table, put down the pencil, and walk back to me. I'll do that. And then sometimes I'll have them draw a clock. Um, clock, depending on their interpretation of a clock. I mean, if it's a digital clock and it looks like a digital clock, we're good. If it's a old time clock with the second hand going around, and the minute hand and hour hand, and they get it right, good. If it's backwards, that could be a problem. Is the following statement true or false? Personality tests measure a person's cognitive abilities. It's false. Personality tests reflect the client's personality, okay, not their cognitive abilities, which is quite different. So you got to be aware of yourself. Judgments are not part of an assessment process. We don't look at a judgment and say, if you had a flat tire and you decided to walk and I wouldn't walk, that's wrong. No, that's an option. It's a viable option. It's okay. But if you had a flat tire and you decided to hitchhike, and you got into a car with a bunch of fun-loving men who had beer, that might be a little bit of a problem. Okay. Be open, very clear about what you want, and also be very honest about uncomfortable subjects. So, of course, look at yourself. Um, you're not you're not any better than anybody else in having judgments. So just kind of keep that in mind. Just don't let your personal beliefs interfere with your therapeutic relationship. We want to be quite professional in our assessment of a therapeutic need with this client. So if I'm right, yep, that's all of 5. So I'm going to stop this share and I'm going to get 6 up. So hang on.